Amen. So we're coming to the end of Saul's life and Saul's reign. He is about to die. Had Saul been paying attention to the king's duties, instead of pursuing David like a flea in the desert, he might have been better prepared for what was coming. David's still probably on his mind, but the real battle that's facing him is the battle that's coming to him from the Philistines. David is no longer his problem. Unbeknownst to Saul, David marches with the Philistines. That's kind of ironic. He's worried about catching David and killing David. David's coming with this group after him. But David's participation is very short-lived because the lords of the Philistines were not in favor of David going along. They told the king in verse 4, "Make this man go back." They wouldn't even call him by name. "Make this man go back to his place you assigned him. He must not go down with us to battle, or in the battle he might become our adversary. For how would this fellow appease his Lord? Wouldn't it be with the heads of our men? Isn't this one David about whom they were singing in dances, saying, 'Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s?'" So these lords are afraid of David, even though the king has given him license to hang out with them in the Philistine country to protect him from Saul. And he's giving him great favor. The lords do not agree with the king. And so they're going into battle and they say, "We don't want this guy. He may turn on us, and if he turns on us, he's a handful. And we can't beat him and his men. There are three storylines developing here all at once. First is Saul's desire to kill David is still strong. We've seen that in the last few chapters. He wants David dead. He's afraid he's going to lose his life, which we know he is. The conflict between Israel and the Philistines seems to be ongoing. It's a continual fight throughout the Old Testament. So that's developing here. And then the new king arising. A new king arises, which we know is David. That's coming into play as well. The lack of trust of David by the Philistine lords had to be self-defeating to David. That had to be discouraging, because he was really going to fight for the Philistines, it seems. When the Lord saw David among their ranks, they were instantly alarmed. So you can't do this. They began to oppose his presence. Consequently, King Achish dismissed David of any involvement in the conflict and told David to return to Ziklag. Now, David did not take that too well. He didn't get mad and blow up and all that kind of stuff and threaten to go to the other side or anything like that. He just said, "What have I done wrong? You made me your bodyguard for life. I'm in loyal service to you now. So let me fight with you." He said, "No, you're like an angel of God to me." You read the whole chapter, you'll see that. He told him, "You're like an angel of God to me. I know you're loyal and you're faithful, but the lords won't have it. So I can't upset my lords. So I need you to go back to Ziklag." So David left. He rose up early. He and his men left in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. Meanwhile, the Philistines went up to Jezreel. So David returned to Ziklag. And he expected everything to be as it was when he left. But when he got to Ziklag, they discovered something awful. Something awful had happened while they were away. Their camp came under fire. The town of Ziklag was attacked by the Amalekites while they were hanging out with the Philistines. And let's learn some valuable lessons here, I think. So what do you do when your spiritual estate, your spiritual condition is suddenly bone dry? You are on empty. You're drained. You've got nothing left in reserve. The life is sucked out of you. Some of you have faced moments like this in your life. You've dealt with things that took the life out of you. Here in chapter 30, we discover what to do when life hits you so hard that you feel like you won't make it through. You're wondering if you will. Chapter 30, verse 1. Now it came to pass when David and his men returned to Ziklag on the third day, that the Amalekites had made a raid on the Negev and on Ziklag, and had attacked Ziklag and burned it with fire, taking the women in the captive, young and old, without killing anyone, but carried them off as they went their way. So when David and his men came to the town, behold, it was burned with fire, and their wives, their sons, and their daughters had been taken captives. Then David and the troops with him lifted up their voice and wept until there was no more strength in them to weep. They cried until they had cried themselves out. Now these are grown, big, muscular men, warriors, soldiers, every one of them. And they broke down and wept because everything that they valued in life had been taken from them. Even David's two wives were taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, which was Nabal's widow. So she was taken as well. Please understand the condition in which their town was found. Ziklag was destroyed. Some of you that have been in war probably can imagine what they experienced. They experienced tremendous loss. Their homes were burnt, destroyed, uninhabitable. They were going to have to rebuild the city. Their women were taken captive. Their children were taken captive and held hostage. Their servants were taken captive and held hostage. It wasn't enough that they were taken. It wasn't enough that their lives may be at risk. Their lives may be in danger. Or they might be abused in some way. There's also the risk of them being sold along the way back to where they came from. They would sell them into slavery, no matter who they were. It didn't matter if it was David's wives or anybody else's wives or children or slaves, servants. They would sell anyone they could into captivity. No one had died in the raid, but David's men didn't know if they were still alive, and if they were alive, what was being done to them, if they were being tortured or abused in some way, or if they were being sold. If they were still alive, then they could only imagine the worst. They felt all the emotions of loss that you and I experience that takes the life out of you spiritually. They experienced agonizing despair. David and his men lifted up their voices aloud and wept so hard that they had no strength to weep further. There wasn't any spiritual strength in them. There wasn't any life left in them. They were at the place of giving up because they didn't think they'd make it through. Notice they grieved together as a unit. They mourned together as a unit. They left their home as a unit. They came back to Ziklag as a unit. They did something else as a unit that takes the story in a unique twist. They were still functioning as a unit when they realized something. Hey, this wouldn't have happened to us if David didn't make us go with the Philistine army. And they began to blame David. They began to talk about stoning David. David was spiritually dry. They unified to a fixed blame. They blamed the leader, of course. They blamed David because of his plan to go with the Philistines. David was in a serious bind, for the troops were calling for a stoning, verse 6. For all the troops were bitter of soul, every man for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Then David said to Abiathar, the Cohen, son of Ahimelech, the priest, the son of Ahimelech, please bring me the ephod. So Abiathar brought the ephod to David. David inquired of the Lord, saying, should I pursue after this raiding band? Shall I overtake them? Now, I've looked at this many years, probably in the wrong way. Maybe you have too. The Bible says that David strengthened himself in the Lord. The King James says he encouraged himself in the Lord. And we think he's back somewhere in a corner while everybody else is talking about stoning him. And he's saying, come on, David, patting himself on the back. Come on, shake this. Get up. Come on, you can get up in the strength of the Lord. You can get up and you can go. Everything will be okay. Get up, get up, get up. Now, come on, attaboy. Come on, shake it off. And I thought that's what it meant by encouragement. That's not what it means. When you study it out, it means he's calling upon the Lord. When it talks about he encouraged himself in the Lord, he remembered where his source of strength comes from. He remembered where his anointing as future king comes from. It comes from the Lord. Everything that's good in our life comes from the Lord. Anything that's evil, the Lord can handle on our behalf if we'll go to him. So what it means is the Hebrew word means he strengthened himself, means he called on the Lord his God. David went back to his roots when he was so dried out spiritually, so drained spiritually, so drained emotionally. Where do I go? A lot of people will call their best friend. They'll cry on their shoulder. They'll spill a tear in their hands. They'll cry on each shoulder. They'll pat each other on the back. They'll hug each other, and they'll try to encourage one another. They need to call on the one who got them where they got this far. How they got this far is the one who did it for them was the Lord, who got them to this place and will get them through this place. David remembered that, and so he got a hold of God. And the way that he got a hold of God back then was they'd call the priest, and the priest would bring the ephod, and the ephod would use the Urim and the Thummim, would designate which color to go, yes or no. Well, or the word of the Lord would come through that thing. And so David inquired of the Lord, saying, should I pursue after this raiding band? Now, you got to know that here in tonight's sanctuary, we can do that and we can talk about it very quietly. But you got to remember, David is doing this in earshot of his men who are saying, pick up a stone. Let's show him what we really think of his leadership. They were ready to stone him. Then he called on the Lord, and the Lord began to answer. And the question was, by David, was should I go and attack this army that attacked my city? And David was responded to by the Lord. David had to gather himself and get his men's focus on the right thing. So he had to redirect their attention to what he was doing, and they calmed down. David had done nothing wrong. He rose as a leader in this moment. He didn't run away from his responsibility as a leader. And he called on the Lord for direction. We sing a song around here that says, I will call upon the Lord, who alone is worthy to be praised. I will call upon the Lord, for he has overcome the grave. What do you do when you've come to a place where you're spiritually dry? You can call your pastor for prayer. You can call a friend for prayer. You can call a council member for prayer. We'll be glad to pray for you. But you've got to get a hold of God. You've got to get back to your source of strength. And your source of strength doesn't come from people. People will make you feel good. They'll pat you on the back. They'll say you're doing all right. Don't worry about it. You'll get through it. They'll love on you as best they can. But your source of strength can't come from the flesh. It's got to come back through the Spirit of God, which brings you back to him in such a way as you get a word from God. And when you get a word from God, you can run through a wall and leap over a troop once you've heard from him and he gets back in your soul the way you want him to be. You get the anointing flowing back in your life. David said, I'll call upon the Lord, so he did. David's been operated under an eye for an eye concept. Jesus hadn't come yet. Grace wasn't instituted. So they operated under an eye for an eye context. And they were going to take David's eye out. In a sense, they were going to kill him because their people were gone. David's response was to call on the God of Israel, the God of the covenant, the one who said, whoever blesses you, Israel, I will bless you. He that curses you is cursed. David knew that promise, and he operated in that covenant that God had given Israel. Stoning David was not the answer. Restoration was the answer. Restoring everything that had been taken. That was what God wanted to see done. So here's how the Lord answered David. He answered him, pursue. David said, shall I pursue them? And the Lord said, pursue, for you shall surely overtake. Because David asked him secondly, will I overtake them? David didn't ask the third thing that God told him. He didn't ask him, will I rescue them? He just said, will I overtake them? And God answered him with three. He answered the question he should have asked but didn't. Pursue, overtake, and you will surely rescue. This fight isn't finished. Come on, somebody. Your fight is not finished. You may have come to a place in your life where you're spiritually drained and you're out of it. You got to go back to the Lord to get your strength. And this fight's not over. One of my favorite lines from the movie, We Were Soldiers Once, and the book is entitled We Were Soldiers Once and Young. Mel Gibson's standing out in the middle of the battlefield, and the guys are telling him, we're getting overrun at every place. The perimeter is breaking down. We're being overrun. And he taps on his helmet, gets his ammo can together and puts it back in his gun and says, no, boys, we're going to win this fight. And there's got to be some of that, no, boys, we're going to win that fight in you as a spiritual person. But it's not you who's going to win the fight. It's the Lord who's going to win the fight for you and through you. But you've got to go back to him to get your strength. David's response was to call on the God of Israel. So David wasn't the answer. Restoration was. Stoning David wasn't the answer. Here's how the Lord answered him. Pursue, overtake, and rescue. He went, David did, and the 600 men went with him. And they came to the Wadi Bezor, where those left behind remained. For 200 men stayed behind because they were too exhausted to cross the Wadi Bezor. Yet David pursued. He and the other 400 men went to pursue the army that had grabbed all their people. What God gave them as they went. Number one, he gave them promise. You will surely overtake and rescue. Number two, he gave them direction. Notice David didn't do anything until he had heard from God. He had a promise from God. You shall pursue, overtake, and rescue. He gave him direction when he told him to go rescue them. Because I don't know if that was done in David's mind. I don't know if he thought there'd be anything left to rescue. He gave them purpose, rescue, pursue and rescue. He gave them clarity. David is not your problem, guys. The people who stole from you are your problem. Blame the right people, go after them. God gave him a mission. Pursue. Rescue the families. You will surely overtake and you will surely rescue. God gave them help. God helped them. How did God help them? In the strangest way you can imagine. Verse 11, they come across a sick boy, a sick young man laying in the field. He's found out that he's a sick slave who had traveled with the raiding party. Because he got sick, he was left behind by his master. He's found by David's men and questioned after they fed him and revived his soul. They fed the enemy. And David asked, will you lead us to the raiding party and act as an informant along the way? He says, I will under one condition, which is kind of interesting because he's really in no position to barter. This is the one condition. You won't make me go back to my master. David said, done. Show me how to get to these guys. And they did. So David attacked. Verse 16. So he led him down, and behold, they were scattered over all the area, eating, drinking, and feasting because of all the great spoil that they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. David attacked them from the twilight until the evening of the next day. None of them escaped except 400 young men who rode on camels and fled. Camels, I guess, are pretty fast. What moved David to call upon the Lord? What did he know that we need to know? Well, let's examine why people do what they do. What's their motive? To call upon the Lord is, I'm going to give you 5 things, and then we're going to quit. To call upon the Lord is to trust him for restoration. You come to a place where you're spiritually drained and you're out of it, you don't know what to do. Tell God, I don't know what to do. You got to tell me what to do. You want me to go do this? You want me to go do that? You want me to go do something different? You want me to do nothing? Sometimes God wants you to do nothing. When the enemy takes your stuff, your people, reclaim that which is yours, and fight on your knees until you get your stuff back. There's a devil who's after your soul. He's after your people. He's trying to steal, kill, and destroy. He's trying to take everything from them, every bit of joy, every bit of life, every bit of blessing. He will steal anything he can get his grubby little hands on. And you've got to fight for your stuff, fight for your family, fight for your people. Stay on your knees until your stuff comes back. Enemy stole your health, fight on your knees until it comes back. Pray, 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 and pray some more. Greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world, 1 John 4:4. God gives you promises in the Word. You can cling to them. No weapon formed against you will prosper, Isaiah 54:17. Rise in faith believing. I think sometimes we fight some things so long, we give up. We don't think God will honor us. He won't honor the Word. He will. Timing is everything in the Lord's kingdom. I'll talk about that in a little bit. God is on our side, so get ready to spoil the enemy who came and took your stuff. You get to take stuff from him when he comes against you. Jesus spoiled the enemy after the resurrection. Revelation chapter 1, verse 18, Jesus now holds the keys of hell and death. The devil had them before. He doesn't own his keys to his own place now. God's got it. He spoiled the enemy. The spoil is the reward of the victor. So you get through a spiritual fight, you're standing strong and you're blessed. There's nothing wrong with that. The spoils, the victor goes to spoils. Number 2, to call upon the Lord is to wait for his direction. Once we have heard from God, then we act on what we have heard. If that's to go do this, to go do that, or to go do this thing, or to do nothing, then we do what God has told us to do. We obey the direction given, we wait for the timing of the Lord, and we ride our camel or horse to victory. Our chariot, whatever you want to ride it. Number 3, to call upon the Lord is to rise in faith. He that comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. Hebrews 11:6. God honors faith. So to call upon the Lord means you're rising in faith. Otherwise, you wouldn't be calling on him. So I don't have any faith right now. Call on the Lord. Seriously, don't just do, hey, Lord, I'm here. Come help me. Get into it. Get on your knees and get alone with God and say, God, help me. Be like the man who was calling upon the Lord and said, Lord, be merciful to me, your servant, for I'm a sinner in the hands of God. Well, the Pharisee just talked, or the Sadducee talked about how great of a man he was, but he paid tithes, he went to church, he did all the right things that were legalistically important to that generation. Where the sinner the publican came to him and said, Lord, forgive me, for I'm a man of sin. He said, I tell you, that man went away honored, because he got on his knees and he cried out to God. Get a hold, what we used to call, get a hold of the horns of the altar. The altar was outside the camp in the wilderness tabernacle, and you would come and pray, grab a hold of the horns of the altar and pray before God. Grab a hold of the horns of the altar. There isn't a question, really, as to what the outcome will be. The only question is how long before we experience it. Victory is ahead. That's faith in action. Trusting God for the outcome before you can see it. Call into being that which you don't see. Have faith in God. Number 4, to call upon the Lord is to trust in the Lord's timing. Timing is everything. You got to get this in your soul. You have to wait on the Lord. I'm tired of waiting. Well, if you get tired of waiting, then you're going to try to make it happen. And you trying to make something happen, it's only going to make it worse. You're getting ahead of God's timing. Wait on the Lord. He will take care of things if you have the patience enough to wait on him to deal with it. To wait on the Lord, his timing is everything. His ways are not our ways, neither is his timing our timing. Isaiah 55, verse 9 tells us that. His ways are higher than our ways. His ways are nobler than our ways. He knows all things. We see a limited picture in front of us. God sees the end from the beginning. We just see the middle where we're living in the moment. We have to rely on the one who can see from the big picture, see from the mountaintop, see from the aerial view, and that's God. He's got the whole picture in mind. If we wait on his timing will be perfect. And the answer will be sweet. Number 5, to call upon the Lord is to trust in the Lord, period. It's to come back to a place when you're spiritually drained, come back to a place where you know if you call on God, he will answer. You can move in faith and get closer to him, expecting him to respond to you and touch you in the way that you need to be touched. And you'll have your own personal experience of a revival if you get connected back to God in the way you need to get connected. And to come to the place where you totally trust him, no matter how long he's making you wait for the promise that you have in his word. It is evidence of a heart that is in relationship with God that we trust in him. That person that trusts the Lord in that way will trust the Lord at all times in every situation. And I got to be honest with you, I don't understand every situation. There are things I see happen in life that's like, I don't know how they're standing it. I don't know how they're dealing with it. You've got friends that go through things. You've gone through things. You've lost loved ones. You've lost children. You've lost husbands and wives. And some of you have struggled through the years with things like that. You've dealt with hardship, dealt with poverty in the economy and so on. I don't know why God allows the things to happen to us that he allows, but he allows them hopefully to make us stronger and draw closer to him and increase faith in our lives. That's what I believe anyway. The evidence of a heart that's in relationship with God, that trusts the Lord at all times in every situation. In short, that effectively forms a biblical worldview of every situation we face. We're going to talk about a biblical worldview the next time we come together. What is a biblical worldview compared to a secular worldview?